Now, company fraud as well as theft and corruption in South Africa are costing the business community over 100 billion rand per year. In studio, we're joined by Cynthia Skuman, now Managing Director of Ethics Monitoring and Management Services, just to discuss a few examples that have come into the news more recently. Cynthia, let's take a look at the Jeff Levenstein story. Now, Alec might have a little bit more history on this than I do, but essentially he was the chief executive as well as the founder of Regal Bank. Yes. It fell into some trouble back in 2001, and in 2004, the company was liquidated. Yes. And only just yesterday, he was sentenced to, I think, 8 years in prison. What exactly took so long for these findings and the trouble within that company to be unfolded?
Well, in fact, in terms of the sequence, he was in fact sentenced, I stand corrected, in the High Court in 2009, and he was given a 15-year sentence then. He was given leave to appeal, and he did appeal, and in fact the judgment just came out this week from the Supreme Court of Appeal that the sentence has in fact been reduced to 8 years.
Let's take a look at some of the counts there. Something that you mentioned rather interesting was that of the counts that were filed against Mr. Levenstein was included 2 counts against the Companies Act. Yes. Is this a first time or a first for this?
Well, I think it's noteworthy that while he had 6 counts in the original charge on fraud and 2 in terms of the Companies Act, I think that we quite regularly see fraud moving into criminal liability, but we don't often see criminal liability in terms of the Companies Act. So I think that is particularly noteworthy. In terms of those 2 counts of the Companies Act, the one in fact, both the conviction and the sentence were actually set aside by the Supreme Court, but the second charge, which is count 8, which relates to reckless trading, in fact that was entirely upheld. Both the charge and the sentence was upheld, and I think that that's a very strong message. You know, we're getting from the judiciary in this case, but I think it's complementing, if you want, the message from the legislature in terms of the new Companies Act and the Social and Ethics Committee. So a very nice combined message.
It's quite a big bank, Regal Bank. They raised a lot of money. There was a lot of depositors there. What exactly did he do to land up in jail?
You know, for me, while there are a number of fraud charges, for me it does come down to that Companies Act charge of reckless trading. And you know, that apparently was absolutely clearly shown, and it cost, you know, depositors and shareholders a fair amount of money.
It is a message, as you were saying, for other people, and yet many non-executive directors are not quite aware of the risks that they're running.
I think that's a very fair point. You know, with the new Companies Act and the increased liability, the amount of insight and knowledge one needs to have of the company really is far higher than perhaps it was in the past. And I think that's appropriate given what is expected of a director in terms of their fiduciary duties, for example.
Would you say that this case has set a precedent?
I think it's a very nice precedent of saying that we really are taking this requirement in terms of the duties and responsibilities of directors very seriously, to the extent that, as I say, we've got a criminal sentence with jail time. So I think it's a great message, a good message.
A good example for further leaders to look at. But let's touch on leadership in South Africa. It seems as though whenever we say South Africa, government, corruption, it sounds normal to us. Similarly to the way that we talk about strike action, as though it's, oh yes, it's just another one. But when you compare South African leaders and corruption, well, I guess corruption is everywhere. But what trends are you seeing with regard to our market versus our international counterparts?
You know, I mean, we do of course see a lot in our press, and we do tend to view it almost as if South Africa's cornered the market on corruption, especially in public sector. But in fact, that's not entirely true. I think an organization like Transparency International does very credible research, and each year they do the same research, so it's got a very nice comparison. And you know, the sad news out of that is that I forget how many countries it is now, they interview like 198, a lot. And do you know that about 70+% fall below the halfway mark where one's moving into very high levels of corruption?
Let's continue taking a look at that, because it seems as though there is a cloud of conspiracy that hangs around the private sector, but isn't really exposed. Recently, we saw J. Arthur Brown of the Fidentia Group also being slapped on the wrist with a fine. We also saw the construction companies, they were fined for collusion, but not much action was taken there. What really drove the Jeff Levenstein case to send him to jail in a sense?
I think in this case, it was really the very blatant, reckless trading, for me, was one of the key issues.
When you say that, could you elaborate a little bit further?
Well, you know, I can't quote the legislation to you perfectly, but in the old Companies Act it would have been Section 424, and I think in the new Companies Act it's Section 77, that really speaks to the fact that when a director becomes aware within the organization that they are not trading profitably, that the company is in risk of failing financially, it is a prime duty to then raise that to the attention, whether to then seek legal advice or advice from auditors, or in fact to call in business rescue. But to continue trading where the company has got a severe doubt around the sustainability of the operation incurs huge liability, and that's where we move into personal liability of the directors.
Cynthia, thank you so much. I do wish we had a little bit more time just to delve into the education as well as monitoring ethics when people move from varsity into the workplace. But that was Cynthia Skuman, who's the Managing Director of Ethics, Monitoring as well as Management Service.